Thank you.
Thank you.
Now the floor is open. Yes, Carmel, you, please. Carmel.
Thank you for the great talk. I was wondering, you mentioned several times the question of getting your technology admitted for the general public, get it into practice. So is there a set procedure for going about this in Germany? To get robotic solutions certified?
I do not know really a completely defined procedure. Of course, as an alternative to these invasive technologies, a lot of people are working meanwhile on electrodes putting up into the head. The signals are much weaker there, but maybe this is a final solution. Of course, if we can avoid the invasion, it would really be the better solution. But at the moment, there is a big difference between the precision of the signals. So, and I'm not really aware of whether there is a systematic process in order to move here forward. But it's, for me, a very interesting question.
Thank you. Joachim, and then Torero. And you.
My question was in a similar direction regarding regulatory regimes, especially also in the transport system, not just in the health system. What do you propose? What would be good regulations that facilitate useful innovations to change mobility? This is a field in which you have worked, so can you comment on that?
I take one example. It was mentioned on one of the Yugrasov on other speaker. In automotive systems, automatic cars, you always find the question, what happens if the car has to decide whether it kills its driver or kills the poor woman with her child. And my question is, on one side, do we not exaggerate this question? How many people have been in front of this decision? How have they reacted? Is half of them still alive, or are they still all alive, or what is happening with that? Isn't in such a catastrophic situation the human also requested? Doesn't he react in a panic way, or how does the human react here? But I understand on one side that this question is important, but on the other side I feel it's treated as too much important. We have the general system, the general problem that when robotic systems are involved, everyone expects that there is no real problem for humans. As there is Asimov's law that a robot never should do any harm to humans. And we had the situation 10 years ago, especially in Germany, that there was a medical robot, the ROBOTOC, for hip surgery. And several patients said, well, we have big problems, and then immediately all the robots were put in the cellar. And so that showed me, and I thought now it's at the end with the robotics in surgery. But then this Da Vinci robot came, and in US especially, there were waiting lists for being operated with the robot, and there were big TV programs now saying that, well, the operations are much easier. In this car situation, we always should keep in mind that we have 1.25 million dead people in the world. So we must admit that very few people will also die with these accidents. But we should be realistic here and not just switch in completely the other direction.
Thank you. Torero, please.
Yes, thank you very much. It was so nice to see the applications, especially for health. How much public money that was invested as a proportion in research and development to develop these designs, or this is just a private sector initiative? And if so, how you foresee the access to it? in the sense of how much this could be a technology that could discriminate the ones that don't have resources to pay for it.
And did I understand you correctly? You were asking how much money was involved
Sector.
from the public?
Yes, if there was money from the public sector.
Yeah, it was, of course, my institute had, at the end, 350 co-workers, and we had maybe 30% funding from industry, but the rest, I don't remember the exact numbers, but there were, of course, many millions involved. And for this assistive robotics now for the elderly care, I was able to collect 25 million euros, which is much, but on the other side, you would always need more money. But there is, interestingly, there was a company and the owners, when they died, they made a gift to the community of Garmisch, 50 million euro, and I could get 10 million from that, and 15 million from the public, so we have now 25 million to push this elderly care project forward. And I think you can do something with that.
Thank
And
you.
the people, of course, always are asking, well, if I have such a robot in my home later on, is it affordable? And then my answer is, well, at the beginning, I think these two-armed robots, if they have some powerful performance, they would be at the range of 50,000 euro. But on the other side, there are a number of old people who have collected this money maybe for buying a new car, but they find that it's no longer worth to buy a new car, and maybe they use it for that. So we have to fight, and but I think many of the technologies are available, including the vital data measuring in the arms with the clocks, the Google clock, and what else.
Thank you. It's you. No, behind you,
Me.
yes.
Yeah.
She was first,
Hi,
and
thank
then
you.
Novak.
Thank you for all of the examples, really nice to see. I come from the ethics of robotics and artificial intelligence space, so I'm always thinking about the ethical dimension accompanying the technological development. And I'm wondering, you know, in my echo chamber, we realize that there are ethical questions that arise while you're designing and developing the technology. So questions about this home care robot for elderly persons, the data that's collected, who has access to the data, who controls the data, are there secondary uses of the data, or if an individual wants to have a whiskey at night and the robot is a fetching robot, are they allowed to have one whiskey or two whiskeys or three whiskeys? Can the robot, you know, have any say over how many whiskeys they might be allowed to have, right? So, so my question is about, you know, these ethics questions arise while you're making, while you're developing, while you're implementing the technology. And is there someone at the Institute or a team of people at the Institute who help to uncover these questions and maybe help to problem solve, to mitigate the problems that might arise when you're implementing?
Well, what was the main problem with your ethic questions? You said a few words about. What was the main point of your ethic question?
Yeah, well, so my main point is that these questions arise while you're making the robots. And so instead of just saying that the robot is going to be a good thing, that there's a lot of people who want to stay in the home, that is true, but at the same time, there's always a balance between competing values. So yes, it's good you want to stay in your home, but maybe it reduces your social interactions with other people. You don't have family members visiting as often because the robot is there to take care of you. Or you have to sacrifice some of your privacy in order to stay at home, because this data could be useful to the companies who are actually giving you the robot. So ethical questions arise with the making and the using of the technology, and whose job is it to solve it? Should the developers be responsible for looking at these questions, or is it only policymakers who have to look at it after the robot has been made?
Yeah, so I must admit that we have not really addressed these ethical questions so far. For the engineers, always the first step is to realize things. And I see in my own village, I see so many old women. Women are living longer because, as you know, men have much more stress and so on.
Well,
No, it was just a joke. But indeed, a lot of elderly women are staying at home. And then the relatives say, well, we cannot observe him every day. And I had the experience with my mother and mother-in-law. I do not tell about that. They were lying in their homes, and they had a button to press. They could no longer press the button, and so on. Terrible things. And so our intention is really to solve these problems and to make people safe at home. And of course, the data which are generated there, that's an important problem. Therefore, I say we do not send. There are these topics of the smart home of the future, and then there are technologies which put thousands of sensors into the floor in order to see whether there is someone lying. I say this is stupid technology, and then they are proud if they can say this is everything is in the cloud. I say it's not necessary at all. We have this robot, and all the data are sent to him, and we do not need to put sensors in the floor. The person realizes, or the sensors realize when it falls down, and the robot looks where does it lie, and then the information channel is through the stomach of the robot, very narrow channel, to the relatives and to the hospital. And I think this is manageable. I've not really fear about that this would not be doable.
Thank you.
But this, in our overarching society, would be such a big help, in my opinion, to let people more self-contained in their home as long as they want. And often they are sent to the old people's home because the relative said, well, it's too uncertain for us, and maybe he lies. And I had this problem in my own family, maybe lie for hours on the floor and nobody knows it.
Thank you. Dovek, and finally your Bruce. Please. Yes. No, switch it on, switch it on. You need a robot. Or anyway. No, man. No.
I wanted to come back to the question of the car that has the option of killing X or Y. And in the beginning, this was thought as a thought experiment. Nobody expected this to happen. And of course, if ever such a situation happened, we had half a second to, or maybe less than that, a quarter of a second to make a decision. So it's very difficult to remember what Kant said and as can be said, and whether it can guide our actions. So this is why it was a thought experiment, exactly like the whiskey experiment. It's a thought experiment. I know my grandmother should not drink too much whiskey, but I give her as much whiskey as she wants. But now, if we have robots and we do program these choices in the code, then from a thought experiment, it becomes a real rule of life. And usually in science, when a thought experiment becomes an experiment, it's seen as a progress. And here, the progress would be that we have to live in accordance to what we say. So before we could say very nice thing about ethics, and our behavior, our actions were kind of so-so, but okay, we know we are human beings. But now if we do program them in the code, it means that what we say and what we do has to be in accordance. Maybe we have to be less exigent, less strong about what we say, because then we have to do it, and we know it's difficult. And I think this is a huge moral progress, that we can program these things instead of just talk about them.
Could really program such a situation. I said, I suppose that the human does this incidentally because he has no longer time to think about that. And maybe we would be so courageous and to say, yeah, let's make this in a robot program also incidental, no real decision, but just a generator which says yes or no. I have no solution for that, really.
First, I thoroughly enjoyed the examples of the advanced technologies you're developing. This is really a technology question. those examples of AI and robotics are solving very specific problems, how to grasp, how to manipulate, how to do specific behaviors are examples of narrow AI. Now there's also, as some of the commenters have alluded to, there's also the question of reasoning systems or moving towards more generalized AI. So things that could do behaviors, artificial systems that could take behaviors based on their own understanding of context and switching context. Have you done research in that area?
Not really, to be honest. Yeah, we have always been working in a fairly realistic world, and based on the idea of showing a robot how things to do, just learning from the human experience and from the human knowledge. Not so much, well, we are now in the process of self-improving, but for simple tasks, of course, like assembly. But assembly compliance is an important task. And so the robots have completely covered spot welding in the factories, but assembly was not really excessive to them in the past. And this is now completely changing. But these are still fairly simple things like grasping in a box and taking the objects. This should be a standard, as has been a big topic over years or decades. But this should be really past now and doable easily. But more than that, own reasoning, I admit we have not really done work here.
Thank you.
Much for such a lively and